home sellers outnumber home buyers by 500,000 nationwide. What does that mean for St. George real estate? What does that mean for your home value? This is the St. George Real Estate Morning Drive. George Real Estate Morning Drive. What's up, Chant? Welcome in.
Hey, buddy.
Jeremy Larkin here. Chantry Abbott, Guild Mortgage. Of course, we're with the Larkin Group, KW Realty. These are some pretty interesting headlines.
Yeah,
I mean,
very.
I mean, legitimately. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to share some of this right on my screen this morning. Chantry, you are with Guild Mortgage. What do you guys do in 10 seconds? What is your? Tell us what your business is.
90% of what we do is help people buy homes.
Bingo. There you go.
If you're looking to make a plan to buy a home, that's what we do.
I love this.
We do refinances and construction loans, but 90% of it's just working with the direct customers to buy a house.
Well, and I
get them ready to buy a house.
I knew you would have a succinct answer. And you know what's interesting? I'm going to share something on my screen right now. So if you're just picking us up, guys, you can watch us on Facebook Live. You might have heard of that little website, a little website called Facebook. These shows are all rebroadcast to YouTube. And you can find us, just look up the Larkin Group or go St. George TV. We had an email go out. Let me tell you about this email. It went out 29 minutes ago.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Subject line, real estate market wake-up call getting louder. Will sellers listen? Chantry's going to talk to us about the two-home Tango. I love this. And turn on your Tango music. And here's what I talked about. Chant, I have this... it's an analogy, more or less. When I'm talking to home sellers and their home is dated, so to speak, typically, we're going to be talking about a home that's 20 or 30 years old. All right. And I would say, Chantry, do you remember, especially if they're older, Chantry, remember 1960? And you'd say, yeah, well, sure, I remember what 1960. What do you think about kind of what was going on in the world and what people were wearing, style of dress, cultural things. Now I want you to think of 1980. Is there a little bit of a difference? And sellers every time will say, wow. And I'll say, that's 20 years.
Yeah.
Your home's 25 years old.
Right.
So
that's great.
So here's where I'm bringing this in. But it gives you kind of a, whoa, it's a check-in, right? A lot of sellers have not figured out what's actually happening in the real estate market. And they're still talking and thinking and living as though it's 2021. That was 4 years ago.
It's hard to believe it was that long ago, right?
Yeah. And if we peaked at the end of 21, early 22, that was 3 years ago.
Yeah. I've kind of always considered January 2022 when the whole thing shifted.
Peak. Yeah. Can you imagine that? That's when it did, right? January 22.
So that's even 3.5 years.
Guys, a couple of headlines. Redfin.com. U.S. housing market has nearly 500,000 more sellers than buyers, the most on record. That will likely cause home prices to fall. This is their headline. I love the sub headlines. There are 34% more sellers in the market than buyers. At no other point in records dating back to 2013 have sellers outnumbered buyers as much. In other words, it's a buyer's market. Now, we understand that that's going to be situational. That's going to be price point driven. For instance, Jesse and I talked about on the show last week, and I'm just literally going to put this on the screen. If you are in the under $500,000 price point in Washington County, there is 3.9 months of inventory. If you're above $1 million,
so there's under 500K is still quite competitive for buyers.
If you're above $1 million, there is 11 months of inventory, almost 4 times. And growing. So the purpose of our show today is it's always to edutain, is what I call it. Right?
I love that.
But I want to talk about, if we look at these headlines, Redfin talked about this, Realtor.com, home sellers are pricing too high and not listening to the market. The state of Utah landed on the podium of a contest they never wanted to be in. They are number 3 in the nation, they as in we, for price reductions. In Arizona, 28% of homes reduced their price last month. Florida, 25%, Utah, 22%. So, something has changed.
Absolutely.
Hasn't it? Okay. because you're a lender and you help people buy homes, talk to us about what this is actually like. Because what is this? This is buyer driven.
Yes.
This issue is a buyer problem.
Yeah.
Tell us about it from a lending perspective.
I think it's all about affordability. So we all understand that, interest rates went from, we'll back up to 2020. Home prices might have had some room to go up a little bit anyway. We were probably still a little bit on the low side of affordability across the country,
Sure,
for where it's at historically. But it wouldn't have went up like it did, except for rates got low. And so as prices were going up, rates were coming down. We would have a buyer that maybe one day we would say, hey, rate's 5%, you can qualify for a $500,000 house, and here's your payment. Well, if that rate goes to 3%, we might have said, well, now you can buy a $600,000 house with the same payment. And so that seller was able to, in that example, raise their price 20% to the same payment to the same buyer pool.
This is so compelling, and I want to throw something in. People will, as people do, say, oh, these sellers are greedy. Chantry, how many sellers have we met in our combined 40 years in this business? How many sellers or buyers have we met that said, you know what? I know I could ask 600 for the home, but I'm just feeling compassionate. I'll do 500.
I'm not sure if I've had one yet.
Yeah, me either.
Myself included.
People are going to do people things.
Yeah.
And people things is I'm going to sell my thing, my widget, my home, my bike, my whatever for the most money that I can get.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is so true. This is so fascinating. This scenario you ran out like, well, hey, rates dropped. So, you can afford more, and sellers are like, sweet, we'll sell for more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The buyer pool just opened up.
Yeah. This is crazy.
Yeah. And it in some cases, it was a little bit more than that even. Rates really went from 6 to 3. It might have been more than a 20% jump on some, meaning I use the rule of thumb. I think you've had me use this rule of thumb with you a little bit. For every 1% change in rate, you can buy 10% more in house and have the same house payment.
Just guys, think about this. 1% rate drop.
1% rate drop.
So from 6 to 5.
From 6 to 5. Let's say I had you pre-approved at a 6% rate for $500,000 purchase. If the rate goes to 5, I can now qualify you for $550, and you have the same house payment.
And I can tell you right now that if you went from 5 to 550, you'd find some. Well, I almost hesitated to say better, but let's be real, better options.
100%. More options, right? Too, especially.
Yeah.
So you think we probably had rates reduce rapidly 3%.
Yeah.
From in the maybe 6 range to in the maybe high 6, mid 5s to 3 to high 2s even.
Yeah.
So 3% change. So if my affordability comment, there's other things that drive it, but if affordability would be the biggest factor, then home prices could have went up 30% and it wouldn't have changed the buyer's monthly payment or the pre-approved buyers that we had. So prices going up wouldn't actually reduce the number of buyers available.
Isn't this nuts? And we watched it. And at the time, we opened the show by saying buyers are outnumbered by sellers, meaning too many sellers, not enough buyers, by 500,000 people, families. We'll just call them sellers. Well, this was not the case. And I think this is kind of fascinating, by the way. When you look at this, according to some of the data that I have right here, that approximately 22% of Americans have a rate below 3%. That's almost a quarter. And by the way, that's just below 3%. If then you factor in below 4.
Correct.
So let's say below 4. Most people below 4% don't want to refinance, or don't want to sell.
Correct. It's too hard they basically would have to double their house payment.
Yeah. And so when you look at what happened in the market and people were flailing and throwing themselves and all of their assets at anybody who would sell them a home, I think that there's something that happened it was like a human sociology experiment. People will always do what other people do, right?
Absolutely.
And the more that people caught wind, oh my gosh, the market's rising, and others are bidding, will bid. So here's the nature of a bidding war. That is the nature. Wait, you'll bid high, I'll bid high. And then you say, oh yeah, well, I'll bid high.
Right.
And you see what happens. This price goes up.
Yep.
Well, the same thing is happening now in reverse.
Correct.
Buyers are like, oh man, I can get some concessions. So what, like, if you have a buyer today, what would be a really typical case scenario? They come in, and I just want to paint a picture of a normal buyer.
Okay.
Right. And what is that? What is a normal buyer from a financial perspective in your world?
Well, area median income is in the $100,000 range household. That means you're probably buying at kind of the peak, like the top is probably like a $450,000 to $500,000 house, which it's not a coincidence that 500 and under is the competitive price point, because that's the income levels of our community.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty economic driven. They have 20 home. First of all, they have 20 homes that could fit their needs.
Okay.
Back even just a couple years ago, it might have been 3. And then you go C3 and you only like 1. Well, now it's 20 and you might like half of them.
Yeah. I think I want to pause. You said they may have had 3. Today they can find 20, right? And when we say fit their needs, realize they might not even want 15 of them, right? But fit their needs.
Yeah. Right. Like when you guys do a search for them. Hey, we need to live here. We need, Bed Bath square footage.
I think you're spot on.
So they have 20 options. So with 20, you're going to find a couple that are really going to work.
Yeah.
And so now we have the opportunity to go play and see what seller is going to be the most motivated. So we're seeing price, obviously, offers low on price.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing a large amount of seller concessions. So what a seller concession is we're asking for the seller to give the buyer some money so that we can use it not only to just pay their closing costs, but so we can also use it to buy their interest rate down. Mm-hmm. The biggest challenge for most people to buy a house, especially a first-time home buyer, is down payment, is cash to close.
Big time.
So the seller concessions can help that out quite a bit. In most cases, the buyer wins if we have a seller buy the interest rate down and pay their closing costs more than if they just reduce the price.
Let's talk a scenario. So $500,000 home buyer, they come in. What would be a typical concession that you're seeing?
$15,000. Yeah. Probably 3% of the purchase price.
This, I want sellers to hear something here. That could be alarming if you haven't sold a home in a while. Mm-hmm. Especially if you are elderly. And like, what's he talking about? This is ageism. Well, it's funny, all the stupid terms people throw around. No, here's the reality. Chantry, has the average 75-year-old, 70-year-old in the country, when they were young and buying homes, did they do concessions?
That probably wasn't even part of our...
Right.
Probably wasn't even part of like mortgage guidelines and stuff, honestly. It probably just wasn't even a thing.
It wasn't a thing. And so, we work with a lot of elderly sellers. So, I really specialize in working with downsizers and empty nesters, and a lot of my clientele are definitely over 60. Over 70. I have 2 that I've just closed in the last 2 weeks over 80. Mm-hmm. I had one of them very specifically. We moved them to Provo. Do you remember the original Ocean's 11? When
I love that.
When they gathered up to talk about the plan at the guy's house at the mansion,
love it.
and the Mormon twins, It was Scott Kahn and what's his name?
I don't remember their names.
Ben Affleck, Casey Affleck. They're like, hey, have you heard of Provo? I think you should check out Provo. I think you do well there. Anyway, they wedged Provo in this show. We moved them to Provo. It was $270,000 contract. I mean, this is not an expensive home. Mm-hmm. Half the average, the median.
Yeah.
And the buyer came in and asked for $15,000 there.
Wow.
And my seller was like, "What?" But they had never done a concession.
Right.
We settled on $7,500, by the way, and they closed. And I mean, we were 45 days from the activation date to the closing date. They got everything they needed. And they're very happy. Yeah. So, but it threw them off, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this typical buyer, $500,000, they might want a $15,000 concession. Mm-hmm. Well, what's a typical mortgage payment of not necessarily just that home, but what do you see most buyers? What would be the most average mortgage payment you see?
Everybody would really like to be under $3,000 if possible.
Okay.
Which really probably puts them as like you need to be borrowing like $425 or $450 or less, depending on credit loan terms.
So you need $50,000 to $75,000, down. Mm-hmm. And remember the day, and I do. It was a month ago that we laughed. It's one of our great clips. Is Jesse said that the average mortgage payment had gone from $1,400 and change to $3,200 in Washington County,
right?
And we laughed. We laughed because it was so brutal.
Yeah. More than double.
Mm-hmm. So I guys, top of the hour, top of the show, I should say, we talked about the fact that Redfin's going, too many sellers, not enough buyers. Realtor.com is reporting that Utah's almost leading in price reductions nationwide. There was another article, I think it was Redfin, they said 700 billion in real estate is sitting for sale in North America right now. Wow. Well, United States. So Chantry Abbott's here with Guild Mortgage, and you've painted a really great picture of, hey, you want to buy a $500,000 home. There's really not much that's under $5,000, and you're going to need a down payment, and you're going to have a $3,000 or higher.
3,200.
Yeah,
probably.
3,200. This is
five. Anywhere from 550 house is probably that average 3,200, assuming we're not doing like a big down payment. We're doing something minimal.
What about, let's talk about this 2-home Tango. I really love this conversation because you're seeing it all the time. What is it?
Yeah. So we put together this flyer because it's, I've been doing this for 17 years. And this is the most challenging time I've ever seen to sell a house and buy a house at the same time, because there is such a gap between sellers and buyers. In fact, I probably would say this as well. In my entire career, the last 6 months have felt like there's a bigger gap between sellers, what they think their home is worth, and buyers, what they're willing to pay, that I've ever seen.
Oh my gosh.
And so they just can't come to an agreement on honestly anything. And so we have so many people that know what their home was worth in 2021. Mm-hmm. The house no longer fits their needs. Some real serious situations. Like we're working with a gal right now. You talk about the downsizers, empty nesters. Her husband has got some muscle degeneration disease.
Oh, man.
And he's starting to get immobile. And so she brought in a handyman to find out what it would cost to renovate their house so he could be wheelchair accessible. And that's like, it was an astronomical number because their house just really didn't fit very well for that. And so then they decided we just got to sell our house and buy one that we can modify, or buy one that's already modified.
Yeah.
Problem is, she's sitting here with me and her real estate agent, and she's thinking her house is worth 2021 $600,000. I could see the agent kind of slowly starting to work it in, and it was like, you're probably like 525 or 550 maybe. Mm-hmm. So maybe somewhere around a 10%. Would you say that's pretty close?
Maybe absolutely. 10 to 15%.
10 to 15%.
10 to 15% lower than peak prices.
So now this is going to take her a while to come to the reality of like, what do you mean real estate always goes up? How come I can't sell my house for 600 when I know it was for, and maybe I even bought it for 600.
Yeah.
That's the really hard ones. Maybe I even bought it for 600. Well, I'm not going to lose money on my house.
Yeah.
And so they listed at 600. Even though the agent, and this is where you guys are better than the average, even though the agent lets them drive it too often, it's like, if you really want to sell your house, it's not going to sell for 600, so why kid ourselves?
Yeah.
Here's the market data. Here's what you're competing against. If we want to sell your house, it's 550, or let's just not even waste everyone's time.
Yeah, I saw Tom Ferry this morning, who's a national real estate trainer and like my first mentor, said 64% of homes sell for less than the original asking price. Mm-hmm. So, I mean... And his comment was, we don't have an inventory problem. We don't even, here's the funny part. We don't necessarily have a buyer problem. We have a pricing problem.
Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating?
Because look, rates might not change. I think everybody's been...
when are we going back to 3%, they ask.
I even get like, I'm just waiting for rates to go to 5. It's like, well, we've been living, the truth is, since 2010, the government started infusing money into mortgages to make the rates lower to encourage people to borrow. Mm-hmm. They're not doing that anymore. If you look across the 80 years that conventional mortgages have been a thing, do you know what the average rate is?
Well, it's got to be, what, 8?
Yeah.
Something like that? I mean, just because I see it, right?
It's 7.5% to 8%.
Yeah.
So we're less than that today, not by a lot, but we're technically below... We'll call it 100-year historical average.
Yeah.
So to be sitting around thinking as a seller or as a buyer, I'm going to wait around for rates to be 5%, that may never come true. It might not, honestly. There's no guarantee that rates are ever going to get to 5% in our lifetime, in our buying lifetime.
In 2000 and probably 18, we'd been in this dialogue on the radio show because, guys, we've done this live radio since the show since 2012.
That's awesome.
And we used to say like 2018, 19. Yeah, home prices have gone up for 6 years. They'll probably come down soon. 2019. They've gone up for 6 years. They'll probably come 7 years. They're probably going to. Well, we know what happened. We went into COVID and then things became unglued. And Chantry, you and I know, because on this show we've talked about, there has not been a 10-year period in which home prices didn't go up.
Correct.
Net,
in 10 years,
net.
you pick it. Yep.
But I love to use freeway analogies. I am back and forth between Utah County and Salt Lake a lot, right? Mm-hmm. All the time. My fiance lives there. And when I drive, by the way, the best time to drive is like Monday nights. So my best drive ever going back and forth was this last Monday night. It was like no traffic. But
right, good tip.
Speed limit's 80. 87 is probably normal now. I mean, it's pushing, but
people in Northern Utah drive fast.
They drive fast, right? So I'll pin that sucker, and I will remind you that Doc and Marty had to go 88 miles per hour to go back to the future in the film. So I was pinned at 88 a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I really was. Now I've got a car that's got steering assist and there was no traffic and I was pretty focused. But here's the funny part about this thing. But there's still a yo-yo, meaning there were times where there were two times where I slammed on my brakes, so to speak. I mean, it's kind of self-braking, but
sure,
like everything just kind of collapsed. You know how the traffic does because there was an issue ahead. And sometimes you're going 65 and 70 and 75 and 71 and 79 and 82. It's an average.
Yeah, you probably averaged under 80.
Yeah, isn't this fascinating? And so when we look at home values, we have to remind homeowners, there's no promise that your home goes up every year. Because if it did, Chantry, no one could afford a home in North America.
Correct.
Period.
Yeah.
Like, guys, the median home price today would be like $5 million or whatever. I mean, it wouldn't be nobody. But so understand that this is over time. There's not been a 10-year period in which we haven't seen home values go up in that 10-year period, like net.
Yeah.
Right.
So safe to say in the long term, it's going to be a good thing for you, for an owner.
Look, guys, I have an opinion that's very unpopular with sellers and it's very popular with buyers, is that home prices really need to come down a lot. And we don't know really if they will. What we know today is that there is absolutely, in our final 2 minutes, pressure on home prices. I promise you. And if you're a seller and you want to have an honest conversation, we definitely can have that conversation. And, there's kind of a conversation I had with a seller this week, a couple of homes we put on the market. Inexperienced kind of real estate people, or maybe they don't know how to navigate the conversation, will often list a home just at a price that is just fully unrealistic, knowing that they just don't want to have that painful conversation. Mm-hmm. Serious professionals, right, are going to help you with a pricing strategy, and they're going like, I will have I had one for an hour and a half this week, hour and a half of talking about the price.
Right.
Because I said, guys, if we don't have the conversation now, we got 1 minute today. We're going to have it later.
The reason you guys want to get with somebody like you guys that's successful, you have clients, you have business, you've navigated every market, is that your customers have to fall into two things. Two things have to happen in order for you to allow them to hire you. One, they have to be able.
Done. Yep.
So they have to be able.
And we
to
got 30 seconds.
Two, they have to be willing to follow your rules.
And
if you've got a real estate pro that isn't making you follow any rules, then what are you paying them for?
Dude, amen. Truer words never spoken. Chantry Abbott Guild Mortgage. By the way, if you want to talk to him about how to navigate the 2-home Tango, or procure or factor in $10,000 or $20,000 in concessions in your home purchase, I want you to talk to him because he's very good at this. Look up Chantry Abbott Guild Mortgage. The Larkin Group, we're on Google. So is Chantry. Just Google us all.
Yeah.
You used to let your fingers do the walk-in and the yellow pages. Now you just voice it. Mm-hmm. That's what Siri will tell you what to do. Over and out, guys. Have a great week.
See ya.